My name's Gaby Wood, and it's my great pleasure to be here today to introduce you to Elif Shafak, who many of you will know is the most widely read female author in Turkey, also very widely read here. She's the author of, amongst other books, The Bastard of Istanbul, The 40 Rules of Love, Honor, which came out last year, and the forthcoming Black Milk. I had the great delight to interview Elif about this time last year, I think, yes, in a cafe, a Turkish cafe in Dalston. It was Elif's suggestion that we meet there, and an extraordinary thing happened. We were sitting there and people just started to not exactly gather round, but they seemed to be nothing to do with us. And then eventually it became apparent that they were waiting for our interview to finish so that they could all come and introduce themselves to Elif and congratulate her. And one by one, every single person in the Turkish cafe came up to her and said how she changed their lives. And I say this to you not because it was a surprise to me, but only because it seems a perfectly apt introduction. And I'm sure that if those of you who have not yet read her do, you'll feel the same. So please join me in welcoming Elif Shafak. Now, Turkey clearly is the country being honoured here this week, and Elif is a citizen of Turkey, but also in many ways a representative of the world. She's had an extraordinary upbringing, and I think speaks particularly on behalf of women. So we can talk about many things here, but I suppose perhaps first you ought to tell everybody a little bit about your upbringing. Is that all right? And the effect it had on the way you write.
Of course. Thank you. I was born in France, in Strasbourg actually. Shortly afterwards my parents separated and I came back to Turkey with my mother, and I was raised by a single mother afterwards. Around the time I was 10 years old, my mother became a diplomat and we traveled, the two of us. So I was in Madrid. I spent part of my childhood there. Spanish at the time was my second language. English was my third. But I love this language. I connected with this language from the first day onwards. And afterwards there was a time in Jordan, Amman, in Germany, Cologne, back to Ankara. And then I came to Istanbul in my early 20s with a great longing, passion for the city. I wrote several of my novels in Istanbul. Then I went to Boston, Michigan, Arizona, where I wrote some other novels. And then now we're commuting back and forth between London and Istanbul. I guess I've always seen, in a way, stories as my suitcase, as writing. For a long time, to be honest, I saw writing fiction as the only continuity in my life, as the thread that would hold the pieces together.
When did that begin?
That feeling came to me very early onwards, and maybe it's because also I did not grow up in an established family environment. As I say, it was just my mother and me, but also there was my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and I think she had a huge impact on me. These were very completely different women. My mother is very westernized, well-educated, modern, very rational, independent spirit, whereas my grandmother is very traditional, very spiritual, if I may say, full of superstitions, less educated, more Eastern. And observing these two, women living under the same roof, coexisting, but also supporting one another, all of these things, I think, also had an impact on me. But from the day onwards, there's a metaphor. From the first day onwards, there's a metaphor that I like a lot. We talk about a tuba tree in paradise, in Islamic philosophy. Some Sufis think that that tree has roots, but the roots are up in the air, not in the ground. And in my early youth, I began to think that maybe my life or my writing was like that. It has roots, but the roots are not in the ground. They're in the air, in the sky.
Can you tell us a bit more about that, about the history of Turkish and what you've taken from it, and whether it's a political issue, the formulation of your own language, as it were?
I think the nation state, of course we have to remember that Turkey was a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious empire, and we're talking about a very vast overseas empire that lasted for more than 600 years. After that, when the nation state was carved out, it was very important to see it as a cultural project. So in a way, I think the Turkish modernization very much resembled French modernization or French laïcité, the way the culture plays such an important role in France. It's very centralized, from above. Language, it was very important to control language. It was very important to control written culture. And just to give you an example, an old Ottoman Turkish dictionary is this thick. A new Turkish modern day dictionary is this thick. So hundreds of words have been taken out of the language because they were coming from Persian origin or Arabic origin. In a way, language has been Turkified. And I think that says a lot about that transition process, how the country tried to find for itself a monolithic identity as opposed to the cosmopolitan past.
And you're rescuing these words for what purpose?
For what purpose? Because I love words. Because I think language in general is older than us, So I don't understand when people say, these words are old and they should not be used. How can I make that decision when their lifespan is much longer than our lifespan, as human beings? This is one of the things that fascinates me in the English language. Regardless of ethnic origin, you have words coming, from so many different backgrounds. When I listen to people, they use the word kısmet and the word chutzpah in the same sentence. I think that's beautiful. Or they use old words and new words. So there's a sense of continuity. Whereas in my country, that continuity has been broken at several important turning points. Again, just to give you an example, and I think these are important to understand the psyche in Turkey. In the past, we used to write from right to left, using Arabic script, but of course the Turkish syntax, the Turkish grammar. And after the establishment of the Republic, we started writing from left to right in the Latin alphabet. Almost overnight or in a very short span of time, people had to make that change. The problem is very few people today can read the old script. As a result of which, for instance, in Istanbul, when you're walking by a historical monument, let's say there's a fountain, there's a structure there, or a tombstone, a graveyard, with an old inscription on it. People have no idea what it says, And I think that's a huge rupture in our memory.
So part of what you're doing with language is sort of, well, not just reconstituting it, but giving it back to people in some way. Do you feel that what you're writing is an offering like that?
I like nuances. For me, nuances are so important. The shades in between. In modern day Turkish, I can say yellow, I can say red, but the shades between, mostly, they used to come from Persian origin. We have lost those hues, the shades, the tones. You know what I mean? And I need those nuances. So sometimes, depending on the story, I want to use old words, sometimes new words. The very distinction I don't want to, recognize.
Right. They're all available.
They should all be available. Because I think when our vocabulary shrinks, our imagination shrinks. Yeah, our systematic of thought, the way we think, our thinking shrinks. So the impact of losing words on a culture, on a society, is huge.
I don't know if this is related, but can we shift a little bit to talk about sort of other impositions of the state? I mean, in particular, just yesterday, I know that you have strong opinions about Fazıl Say. Can you speak about that? About what should be done about that? What we should think about that? I mean.
Yes, I mean, yesterday's news came as a surprise, as a shock, I think, for many people in Turkey, outside Turkey. I wasn't expecting this. Fazıl Say, he's a very well-known, world-famous pianist, and he has been given a suspended 10-month jail sentence for the tweets he posted. And I think I hear this so often in Turkey. People say, yeah, but these tweets were so offensive, they were so negative. doesn't matter. I mean, I don't have to agree with his tweets. I don't have to agree with the things he said, but I should support his freedom to say, that's something else. So we don't make that distinction, and I think that is very problematic. We have to go back to the basics, and talk about the essence, the very core of freedom of expression. And to be fair, I think Turkey has really made a lot of progress in the last 10 years. And we can also talk about this, should the audience also be interested. However, one of the things that's so confusing about Turkey, positive things and negative things can happen exactly at the same time, in the same country, sometimes within the same week. So we're always confused. It's a very complex, very multi-layered country that cannot be easily put into one context. But in my opinion, we urgently need a new constitution, one that is much more egalitarian, much more pluralistic, much more democratic, of course, because this constitution dates back to 1980 military takeover. Even though it has been amended here and there, changed, still it's not enough. The basic liberties, for them to be redefined, we need a new constitution. So lots of these problems stem from the old laws or the way they are being implemented today.
And you yourself have been the victim of that, right? I mean, well,
No.
temporarily.
Temporarily.
Elif was accused under Article 301 of crimes against, against Turkishness. But it was the first time that a fictional character, something said by a fictional character, had come into court. So the first time a fictional character had been accused of a crime, and in fact she was acquitted. So, but it does mean that she's well placed to speak about what can be done. How about people here? I mean, the question of what people outside Turkey can do about that. What do you think?
In my personal experience, it's very important not to distance countries and not to make sweeping generalizations about people. This is true, I believe, for every single country, but particularly for Turkey, in which all these, conflicts and complexities exist side by side. Identity for us is a big, big issue. We're a threshold society. It is a democratic country, but it's a country in which democracy is not mature, and we come from a strong state tradition. I think that's very important. So there's this tendency, almost like a reflex, like a knee-jerk reflex, to protect the state vis-a-vis the individual, the words of the individual, whereas it should be the opposite, We have to protect the individuals, we have to protect the minorities, vis-a-vis the excessive power of the state. So our priority has been protecting the state. To make that mind shift is very difficult. To say that, it's people's liberties, it's the civil society that we should be emphasizing. And I think in that sense, journalists, writers, intellectuals can play a role in their own way. Yeah.
How about women? I mean, you were raised by women. Clearly, you write a lot about women. Do you feel? What's your position now on the sort of room of one's own issue? I mean, whether women are free to write exactly the same as what men write, whether they write in a should this be distinguished? Do they write with a qualitative difference? Are there still freedoms that need to be gained, and that we need to represent?
Yes. I mean, it's a question that matters to me a lot. And when in my country, and I believe around the world, we can see this pattern, but particularly in Turkey, when I look at the fiction readers, I would say 85% of them are women. Women read a lot, and the interesting thing is they make the men around them read. So usually when I have male readers coming to, have a book signed, I can guess that it's either his wife or his girlfriend or someone, who has read that book, a woman in his inner circle, and then said, you must read this book, and so he started. So we owe a lot to women readers, this dynamism of the literary world. But overall, I would say, even though we have of course, we have great women novelists and poets and journalists, but overall the written culture is quite male-dominated in Turkey. So when you look at editors, publishers, critics, and also the language of criticism that's being used, I think it's incredibly sexist, and it's very difficult to talk about these things. This year I had the honor of being on the judging panel of the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize. And yesterday we had a panel, we were talking about this. It's amazing. There are very few women candidates, you know, when you look at the International Fiction Prize. That's not because women don't write, but very few women are being, relatively speaking, translated, or women do publish, they are being translated, but how many of them are being reviewed? When you look at the numbers of women writers who are being reviewed in prestigious literary journals around the world, there's an amazing imbalance there. And in Turkey, that imbalance is even deeper.
And what can be done about that?
I think, first of all, we should be aware of this. You know, we should be able to talk about this. It is very difficult to talk about sexism because, as I said, it's nothing concrete. I mean, if there was a law saying you cannot enter through this door, you know, then we can show that sign and we can say this is a problem. But when things are abstract, when things are internalized, it becomes more difficult. In my opinion, it's much more difficult to change sexual taboos than political taboos, because people on very different sides of the ideological spectrum can have incredibly similar views when it comes to gender and sexuality issues. So they might differ about day-to-day politics, but when it comes to, you know, the role of women, you know, wives, etc., conservatives and liberals or leftists and rightists can come up with similar attitudes. So we have to see beyond these ideological divisions and really talk about, I think, the existing gender patterns that keep coming with us in the literary world as well. So the literary world is not immune to this.
Hello, my name is Ali Berktay. I am a translator, editor, and playwright. I have a sister. Her name is Ayşe Berktay. She is in jail since for 2 years in the KCK case. I have a stepdaughter, Zeynep Cerenkuray. She is journalist. She is in jail since 2 years. For Zeynep, English Pen is making a campaign. For Ayşe, it is American Pen who is making a campaign, because Ayşe is translator and writer. And it is really, personally, I was in exile after the 1980 when the military came to power. And so I have, personally, I have lived everything you have talked about just there. And I cannot understand how a government who claims that the democracy was in danger because of the military, when they come to the power, when they eliminate the military power, why they are continuing to use these methods, the same methods, when they are in the government. It is not easy to explain that, I think. And as a writer, I ask you to say something about the freedom of persons who are in jail in Turkey for their ideas.
Thank you.
First of all, I'm very sorry to hear what your family has been going through, and I'm sure it's very painful. I understand your question, and there is a continuity. There are things that are changing, there are things that are not changing. And it's really important to talk about all of them at the same time, which makes our job very difficult, yeah? I think we need to talk about authoritarian reflexes. And I don't think this is germane to the military or to only one, you know, ideological group or one political party. Isn't it interesting? Sometimes Kemalists and conservatives, people who call themselves maybe different labels, can have the same authoritarian responses to voices that are critical of them? How are we going to change this mentality? So I don't think it's only, you know, the conservatives that are like that, or this group or that group. I believe it's, unfortunately, it's something that pervades the entire society. This is the way we grow up. We are always looking for a Baba figure in everything. In politics, we want a Baba, a father figure to save us. Even in sports, in football, you know, we want a Baba figure. When the economy was going down the drain, we wanted a Baba figure to save us. We have to stop expecting things because we're so used to seeing change coming from top down. Yeah, this is the way we modernize. This is the way we westernize. Now we have to, perhaps as a nation, start thinking that we change things from bottom up.